Hello, everyone. We are committed at Facebook to building a workforce as diverse as the communities we serve. As we know, diverse and inclusive teams make much better decisions. Moreover, inequality isn't new. It has been around since the beginning of mankind, and even the word mankind is not really that equal, and it expresses some gender bias. So today we'll definitely be talking about gender, but the topic of inequality spans so many different areas: race, sexual orientation and identity, differently able, socioeconomic disparity, and with these challenging times, we're seeing the acceleration of inequality in all these aspects. So we feel that this is opportune to have an important conversation like this. My name is Karen Teo. I'm the VP of the Skilled Global Business Group in APAC and Facebook, and I'm very proud to lead a team of 130 people that spans like 21 different nationalities, as well as to be the exec sponsor for our women and pride groups at Facebook. Now today, I'm joined by an incredible group of women leaders, really strong, amazing leaders from across different industries and professions, and very diverse and dynamic backgrounds, to discuss the future of equality in business. If I may, let me just introduce our panels. Adriana Gascoigne, she's the founder of Girls in Tech, doing really important work in building for our future tech leaders. There's Emily Chang. She's the board director for SOS Children's Villages. She took a year off to write a very important book on purpose. I would love to hear more about that in your self-introduction later. Jane Lynn Baden, the managing partner of the APAC Publicist Group and CEO of the North Asia business, and Sarah Liu, founder and MD of the Dream Collective, a consultancy that works with companies on their D&I strategies. So let me just hand it over to my esteemed panelists. Adriana, shall we start with you, and then we'll go around to everyone else in the order that I introduce you with.
Sure. Well, it's nice to connect here, and thank you to Facebook and Advertising Week for hosting such an important panel on such an important topic. My name, as Karen mentioned, is Adriana Gascoigne. I'm the CEO and founder of Girls in Tech, and also an author of a book called Tech Boss Lady. So if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, please go out and read it. Hopefully it will help you. Girls in Tech is an organization that I founded in 2007 in San Francisco, California. And at this point, we are in 54 cities in 37 countries and 6 continents with over 60,000 members. And we're here to provide educational opportunities and experiences so that women in tech can excel. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited for the panel.
Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Chang. I'm delighted to be speaking with people from all over the world. I've worked 10 years or so in the US and 10 years in China as well. I've worked at some companies more on the client side at Procter & Gamble for 11 years, and then I moved over to Apple, Intercontinental Hotels Company, and most recently I was the CMO of Starbucks. As Karen mentioned, I took a year off to write a book, which is going into final proofing tomorrow. So thank you for celebrating with me on this very momentous day. Writing a book, Adriana, many props to you, because it's like birthing a child, which it is also done. And it's just about as painful and took a lot longer. But one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was I really felt like there was an opportunity to speak to female leaders in particular, but all leaders who stand for something. Being authentic and purposeful leaders, I think, helps us gain followership, build a culture that everybody is excited to be a part of. And I think that starts with ourselves and figuring out who we are, what it is, that we do in our personal lives that then transcends into who we are in the business world. So that's what the book is about, and it's coming out much later in 2021.
We'll wait for it, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Karen, everyone, hi. Thank you for inviting, and it's really excited to be here. I'm Jen, looking after Publicist Group in APAC, the key accounts capability, and also P&L in North Asia, including the Greater China and Korea and Japan. So I have been in industry for 15 years, and I had my own startup for 7 years. It's a digital technology company for 7 years. I would say that probably the most memory thing for me is 1 year sabbatical that me and my husband took. And so we took our daughter out and we had 1 year completely off from work and for missionary. So I would say probably in my entire career life, that 1 year is the most exciting time for me.
Amazing. Over to you, Sarah. Oh,
Daryl, can't
no,
hear you.
we can't hear you, Sarah. Maybe you have to unmute. No. You know, in this, during such times, it's really challenging. Like these tech issues pop up all the time. We had just done a tech run and everything was perfect. All good. Shall we try again, Sarah? Can you hear? Yes. Good thing Sarah had a backup, like a true entrepreneur, her AirPods on hand. Can we hear anything? No.
So,
No. All good. Tell you what, Laurie, if it's possible, can you help Sarah with this? Would love to come back to Sarah to hear her self-introduction. So on the back end, perhaps, Laurie, we can help Sarah up with this. I'm not sure what's happened tech-wise. And maybe what I'll do, Sarah, just one last try. Can we hear you? Test. Maybe what I'll do then, I'll jump into the questions that we have, and then we'll come back to Sarah again. Can we do that?
Great.
Okay. How about now, Sarah? Oh, it looks like there's some bandwidth issues on your side, Sarah. So while we wait for that to stabilize, we good to go? Sarah, can you say something just so that we can hear you? We can see, we can hear you. No, not working. Laurie, we'll leave this to you. I'll jump straight to the questions. Apologies for the tech issues, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Now, I really wish tech wasn't a problem because I wanted to start by getting personal. I wanted to hear from all of you how you've experienced inequality and how that's changed you, if it has at all. Really keen to hear from around the room. This is something that I want to hear from everyone. So perhaps we can go. We'll start with you, Emily. It'll be great to hear your view.
Sure. So just talking about how we've experienced inequality in our own lives and professional environments.
Yeah, and how it's changed you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd like to say is I feel like we are in a world where there's no such thing as normal. There is no normal, and yet all of us is constantly trying to normalize. I think that's what we do, right? As humans, we look for patterns and we're trying to find the outliers. So as a result, we tend to look for the too something. This woman is too bitchy or too cold. This one is too nurturing and too soft. Everybody is too something, too short, too fat, too ugly, too beautiful. and you know, I think when we talk about inequality, there are so many different ways that we are too something. I worked in hospitality as an executive, and I posted on LinkedIn my teaser, if anyone has come in from the LinkedIn link, where I talked about what do you do when somebody turns to you and gives you a coffee order? We are the only female in the room, and what is the right way to respond? And, you know, I've thought about this a lot, and it's a question I get often, and I think responding with grace is the best solution for me, because I was thinking about the Hippocratic Oath, which is the oath that doctors take when they become doctors, and it is to first do no harm. So if we're in a meeting room, we're here for a reason, right? And we want something positive to come out of that circumstance, whatever it is. So if somebody asks me for coffee, I can ignore them completely, but that doesn't do any good, and it does harm. I can go get the coffee, but that doesn't really do much good either, right? Not only for me, but later when the gentleman finds out that I control, they will lose face, and it's not a company. I can be outraged, and I can say, I'm not a server, and you know, this is not my role, but that doesn't do anything for our relationship, and nobody ends up happy. So I think responding with grace is always a good solution. So for example, you want some coffee? Actually, I'm quite tired. I think I want some coffee too. Perhaps I can find somebody to help us. It's just an easy solution. And one of the other things I had shared with Karen is that I've cared for differently abled children across Asia and the US. That's what my book is about investing in our communities and where we are and the opportunity that we have to serve. And it struck me how differently and how unequally differently abled people are treated. And that has become a real passion area for me. So I think it's not just that we are women, not just that we are to whatever we've been called and whatever label we've almost accepted. I think it is responding with grace and recognizing that there is no normal at all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Emily. That was a really good start to our conversations. Would love to hear, okay, let me try to check in with Sarah. Perhaps this is the time where you introduce yourself and tell us as well if you've experienced inequality and how that may or may not have changed you.
Yes, just checking. You can hear me now?
Perfect. Fabulous.
Oh, great. Wasn't quite sure what happened there. Probably because we're in Australia, it's way too far. I think for me, equality, or probably the lack thereof, has just been a little bit of a story of my life. Having grown up as an Asian, girl in New Zealand, and then later on in Australia, I think the pressure has and sort of the difference, has been just very much part of how you grow up. And I've always been quite ambitious in sort of climbing the corporate ladder when I was still in corporate. And I've had many recruiters actually told me in my face that there are being an Asian women in Australia, I would just manage your own expectation about how far you can go. And I think whilst that might sound like, it's quite sort of unusual or like quite jarring these days, I think, to be honest, it's still very much sometimes, whilst it's unsaid, I think that's probably still very much the reality as well. So that's actually what prompted me to start the Dream Collective, which is a global diversity and inclusion consultancy. And we've actually since grown across the APAC region, now operating in 5 different countries and predominantly working with technology companies to help them solve 3 problems, which is to attract, retain, or advance female talents in particular.
That's great. I mean, this is like I think this is almost a common story I hear across this group of panelists. Like, you've experienced it and you want to do something about it instead of just like living with it or complaining about it. And I think this is like a great segue to Adriana. You shared with me some of your stories of discrimination. I would love to hear how that's changed you and your journey as a person, as a human being, as a woman.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's a sad story to tell, but there's always a silver lining. Even with this COVID-19, I always remind myself that there's a silver lining in here somewhere. So much like this, which we're experiencing now, I started, as you know, Girls in Tech in 2007, and I was one of 35 people working at a startup and the only woman. And as you can imagine, actually, and the only minority. Right. So in terms of racial background, I definitely checked the box of being a super minority compared to all of my white male counterparts. Right. And going into work every day, I would look around the room and be confused as to why the recruitment team wasn't prioritizing hiring diverse talent. And 2, confused as to why more women weren't applying for jobs, because I was really loving the startup scene and building products and innovating and the scrums and all of the innovation that goes on behind the scenes at startups. So because I actually personally experienced some inequalities revolving around, sexual harassment, being spoken to a certain way, not being able to get certain raises when the raises came around, being marginalized in terms of being invited to be on certain projects that I always raised my hand for. It was a difficult situation. And I thought to myself, like, I shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. I shouldn't have to be marginalized. And I should be welcome with open arms to work at a startup because I'm smart, I'm creative, I'm really enjoying my job. And it made me sad. That part made me sad. So with my one friend who happened to be gay, I pitched the idea to him and I said, hey, I'm really thinking about starting this sort of support network, this networking organization, to really empower women in tech and bring them together, because selfishly, I wanted to get to know them and see if they were out there and build ideas and mentor and maybe just come together and build companies, right? And that's why I started Girls in Tech actually in 2007. And, you know, very, very grassroots and cutting cheese, pouring wine. I borrowed my friend's dance club in San Francisco, and I said, hey, we're just going to try this and see how it goes. And we had over 200 women in attendance in 2007. That was a really, really big deal. And, you know, cut to 13 and a half years later, as I mentioned, we're global. We have a massive international footprint. So I really felt, I continue to feel inspired every day when I talk to people in Nepal, in Paris, in Chicago, in Miami, all the impact that we're making in the lives of women in tech and even marginalized women in socioeconomically challenged areas in inner cities, developing nations where they don't have access to bandwidth, devices, and the common education that all people deserve. So, you know, our work is cut out for us. I think we have a long way to go. We haven't scratched the surface, but I'm glad to say that 13 and a half years later, we're making a mark in our society.
Thanks for that, Adriana. You know, in the conversation I had with Jane yesterday, we talked about the problems of inequality, and Jane was like, I want to talk about solutions. I want to talk about how we look at these problems and what we're doing about it. So I think this is like a great dovetail into like the stories that Jane may want to share. And the question, maybe not so much about how you've experienced inequality, but in your point of view as a really strong like corporate leader, what does equality in business mean to you, Jane?
Yeah, well, Karen, yeah, I think that being an Asian woman, we all probably more or less experience inequality. And so personally, I do have an experience. I still remember in my earlier career time, and I was asking for opportunity of promotion. I've been told very straightforward that you won't get it because, you know, you're not going to be successful simply because you're a woman. Period. And I still remember the earlier time when I started my career, and I was in PR industry, which is in a very prominent PR firm. And I think that the definition of PR at the time for Asian women is you just give coffee, you know. So I think I grew up and I learned that, you know, equality is not my problem. Equality is the people who impose equality to me. That's their problem. That's not my problem. And I think being an Asian woman is a very strong identity, and I love it. So back to your question, I think I want to talk about the solution is that I think once the woman getting the opportunity, you know, I think I get into I get the opportunity and I get a very good blessing on what I'm doing right now. I think the minimum things I can do is I'm being fair, right? So in my own capacity and influence circle, I'm being fair and providing the equal chance to the people who are capable, regardless whether it's an Asian woman, non-Asian woman, or man or minority. I think that's the minimum things that I can do being a leader.
Thank you. And this is yours is about providing equal opportunity, being fair as a leader. I think Sarah had some interesting research. You showed that if a company had 50-50 diversity, they had some awesome results. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. I think sort of firstly, the sort of equality piece, what I really want to first and foremost challenge everyone who's tuning in today is actually around really understanding and differentiating equality versus equity. So equality is about achieving fairness by treating everyone exactly the same. And equity is getting to the same place, fairness, by giving people the tools that they need in their unique situation, recognizing this difference. And that's where that inclusion really comes in. So I think, you know, I really want to encourage everyone to think about equality not as treating everybody the same, because that's actually not what will actually get us to equal footing at the end of the day. And I think, you know, what we're really passionate sort of in doing here at the Dream Collective is actually constantly use sort of data-driven sort of research to really encourage companies precisely to move beyond the rhetoric. So during COVID-19, actually, we conducted research with over 2,000 professionals across Australia. And we then assess what companies that performed the best during this crisis period had in common. Which companies are able to innovate better, pivot better, and achieve highest employee score. And guess what? It was companies with an equal gender split, 50-50, that performed the best across across all the measured areas. And if you want to actually download the report, you can head to the Dream Collective website to actually see the detail and the broken down. It's so fascinating. And I think what we really want to use that for is precisely to actually challenge companies to say that, hey, you know what? If you want to come out of this pandemic and this sort of crisis, this pivot point, better than before, if you want to build back better, you need to be thinking about who's leading your team, who's leading your organization. And the first starting point is to make sure that there's diversity and equity on that team.
Thank you. Interesting. You mentioned this whole period of challenge for a lot of companies, COVID-19. We've seen a lot of COVID-19 research, and it says that it's not just a public health crisis. And I'm really, I'm kind of zooming out a little bit more here. And there's also the biggest setback to gender equality, and it's not even just gender, it's race and minority discrimination. And I know all of you have like very strong points of views on this. I'm going to go back to Adriana on this. I know you've got some things to say about this. I'm sure the audience would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about COVID-19 and its impact towards women across the board, not just in the US, but around the world. I do have some statistics to share about how it's impacting women of color in the US, but we've been disproportionately impacted for a few different reasons, and Latina and Black women are faring far worse than their white counterparts. When it comes to layoffs or furloughs, women typically don't have the tenure and seniority as their male counterparts. We're noticing that and seeing a lot of that as the reason for women being made redundant in many cases. The caregiving responsibilities typically fall to women, and with schools and daycares closed, women obviously are impacted. They have to take that, into their own hands. In June, the unemployment rate for Latinas aged 20 and over was 15.3%, while the unemployment rate for Black women 20 and over was 14%. So both figures are roughly 3 times the unemployment rate Latina and Black women faced in February before the pandemic hit. So it is really impacting. It's going to continue to impact into 2021. And again, that is one thing that Girls in Tech really cares about. So at this point, we are providing all of our programs, for the most part, free of charge. So we used to charge for every program that we did, like coding programs and leadership programs and design thinking and whatnot. And now we're providing everything for free. We are delivering a virtual mentorship program, as well as a digital career fair, really trying to support those who have been impacted, and for those people who have been made redundant or are now unemployed. So it's pretty dramatic statistics.
I think on the subject of statistics, we did some research before we did this panel, and Deloitte did a really reported that it will probably take, at the pace of 1% a year of women getting into board seats, it will take 30 years before we hit parity. I don't know if we have time for that. I think the work that you do, Sarah, speaks to this. What do you think? Do you think we can accelerate that process?
I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything, is that change is a decision. Honestly, if you ask world leaders across the world, how long do you think we'll get the entire workforce across the world universally to start working from home? They will say, oh gosh, it's a minimum of like a 6-year change management program, and our infrastructure needs to do X, Y, and Z. But in fact, when it's need driven. Okay, when you need to do that, when you make a decision, it's an overnight transition. And I often challenge our clients that, if government tells you that unless you've got a gender equal board or gender equal leadership team, your business, your company won't be able to operate tomorrow, what would you do? You will do everything you can to accelerate that. So I think, yes, by the current rate of change, absolutely, the World Economic Forum forecasts 217 years for us to reach gender equality across all the areas around sort of safety, economic empowerment, political participation, etc. But really, I think if we can all make a decision to commit to an action, to make a leadership decision, that would actually, the change will come way faster. And I absolutely think it's possible. And I actually think that, something that Bill and Melinda Gates actually talked about when they started the Gates Foundation really fundamentally impacted me. And they are all about being impatient. They said people who actually drive and deliver and achieve results are the ones that are impatient because they need to see change today. And with that also, I really want to challenge that. Yes, the stats will tell us the story and almost educate us in a way to accept that as reality, but change starts with a decision, and that can accelerate things like we can't even imagine.
Thank you. It is true. Even in tech, we see sometimes adoption of solutions and mindset shifts. Like we were expecting 10 years for some of these changes to happen. When COVID set in, suddenly the data looked like it was happening in months. So exactly. You're right.
E-commerce adoption, same thing, Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this is also good to go to like something that Emily told me before. I mean, I was asking her, when it comes to inequality, we kind of like this only surfaces during certain times where the magnifying glass gets put on it. And with this COVID situation, I'm quite far removed from what it's like to live in like the US, for instance. And I don't know, and I hear about this COVID-19 like bias against Asians at this time. I'm keen to hear how you're experiencing this as a entrepreneur, and an author, and how you're dealing with it.
It is an interesting place to be because I spent half my life in China and half my life in the US. I feel I'm both. And it's interesting. I don't think there are many times in my life I felt discriminated against in the US as an Asian, if I'm honest. But recently, it's been very interesting. I live in Bellevue, just outside of Seattle, Washington, which you have probably seen in the news.
Yeah.
And I was commenting to Karen, I think we need to be more adaptable than ever before and sort of flow with the circumstance. It's not just as a professional, as a woman, as a mother. I go outside with my daughter and she says, Mom, should we wear a mask today? And my answer is, it depends. Because if everyone is wearing a mask, we're going to wear a mask. If no one is wearing a mask and we're the only Asians wearing a mask, that's putting us in a situation that's also not very safe. We have Black Lives Matter protests everywhere, and we are participating as well. And I think it just starts serving a broader narrative, which is it doesn't matter if it's because I'm Asian or I'm differently abled or I'm Black. There is just a lack of equality, and the way that we choose to speak up and stand up, not only for ourselves but for the people around me, I think is really critical right now. And I think I was sharing with Karen a little story where I was speaking with my daughter in Mandarin, just walking down the street, nothing very dramatic, like 今晚是什么 or something, and this guy started screaming at me about the Kung flu. Thank you, President Trump, for that. Very clever. And your reaction, again, just like when somebody asks you for coffee, it can be many different things. But if you react in anger, nothing positive will happen. And so I turned to the guy. I didn't really know what to do, but I knew it was an important moment for him and my interaction, but also because my daughter is watching. So I asked him, is there something I've done that's offended you? And when he heard my English without an accent, he said, oh, no, you're okay. And I said, oh, that's interesting, sir. Why do you think I'm okay now? What would have been different? And, we had a dialogue about it. And I think that's important. Even if you don't end up at a perfect place, if you don't open communication, there is zero chance for mutual understanding. And if you have zero chance for mutual understanding, there's zero chance for mutual respect. And we'll never get out of the place that we're in. And I think that's also why our family made a sign and we went out and stood up for Black Lives Matter, because I think we have to have a point of view and we have to open that dialogue.
No, I loved it when you told me one of the ways you cope was like a very Chinese idiom of like flow like water, right?
Yeah.
I love it. It makes a lot of sense. But if I look at the different, if I take a different perspective to that, there is also the stereotype and like and the shackles of the model minority, where we're expected to excel, work hard, keep your heads down, just go with the flow. What do you think about that point of view? Like, how do you talk to dissenters on that?
I think none of us is stereotyped, and we don't just fit into one generalization. You know, there are some moments where I might look like a model minority. There are other times I might look like a very independent protester. I think this idea of sharing, being like water, is flowing to the circumstance and being more adaptable. And I think in my younger years, I was not. I always had a point of view and I always had, what I wanted to do. And now I find I'm much more like water. But I was saying to Karen, I think water is not just windrow. It's not just this sort of gentle fluidity, because water carves a path through rock as well. It is about going the path that makes the most sense so that you can achieve your end goal.
Well, honestly, the way you spoke to the gentleman who was heckling you, that was not at all, it was not at all like heads down. It was very like addressing and pulling him into a dialogue. So kudos, there was courage and not at all like the usual model minority stereotype of a quiet Asian. So
And I think
well done there.
And actually, if I can add to that, I think what Emily's talked about is so important, because I feel also a lot of times we're not opening up that dialogue with people who holds very different views.
True.
And I feel the essence of inclusion and diversity is actually sometimes inviting disagreement. And I've actually been in training rooms with almost like 200 Japanese men, okay, who does not buy into gender equality at all. But usually those are the most rewarding and fascinating conversations. And that's when change actually happens. So I really much feel like it resonates with what Emily has said. I think that takes a lot of courage, but it's absolutely needed to shift the dial forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So on this, oh, sorry. Jane, please, I was just going to go to you.
Sure.
No, please go ahead, Jane.
What Sarah said that I think the conversation definitely is very important, actually needed, because many of the things comes from a different context and misunderstanding. I mean, we assume there is a equality problem, but there is also a context why people have that perception. I think being able to address that problem, having that conversation in public is a step one. But at the same time, I do think that there's a structure and system things that we need to address. I think go back to Sarah mentioned about 50-50, and we talk about, how women in a different, or Asian, that different role in the corporate. I think McKinsey has a number, which I find it quite fascinating, because we are an Asian woman and we're talking about this number. But if I look at this, even in Asia, in terms of the country, now, we are seeing actually more women coming into a mid-level management, even senior management. Australia has like 20% and China still have 11%, which is at the senior management level, i.e., CEO direct reporting to CEO. And Singapore is about 25. But if you look at board level, where it's really to decide a company policy, company structure, and have a greater influence on how a corporate operates. Now, if you look at China, it's only 10%, and Japan's 3%, and Singapore 8%, Australia 18%. So it's far from 50-50. Now, I think that's a different topic of why we have a conversation, and we all need to be impatient because the system needs to address. And how do we design the structure to have that thing moving towards more, openness to different, women and so on the senior level? I think it's something that cannot be avoided to be addressed.
For sure. We were going to talk about this very unfortunate term of bamboo ceiling. And a lot of this, I think, it is, firstly, it's an unfortunate term. Secondly, it's not even just about locals or talent from elsewhere being imported into high-level roles. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing as leaders what are we doing in the work that for communities that we're opening up that pipeline and opening up the roads to growth and elevating people who are talented that may not fit the cultural norm. And I'm keen to hear from all of you, some of you, if you've got thoughts on this.
I might go first then. So I think, that really resonated with me, because I think in Australia as well, like the cultural diversity has becoming a little bit of a topic. And I feel that we need to actually really challenge business leaders to appraise and evaluate performance and what good leadership looks like, and really redefine that. Because so much of the bamboo ceiling, for the lack of a better terminology, is the fact that we evaluate leadership traits based on the very the stereotype that it comes from, right? It's you must speak up, you need to self-promote, etc., which are not virtuous in other cultures. In fact, quite the opposite. And so very often, we hear particularly Caucasian leaders that talks about, I just wish, they play a bit more politics, get in there, because that's how you get ahead. I will really challenge everyone to redefine how we get ahead, right? And so I think, if we remove the ceiling, we reassess how we define good leaders, okay? Rather than getting this sort of Japanese women who is just not comfortable really challenging and negotiate in such an aggressive manner. It doesn't mean she's not a great leader. It just means that she's not going to communicate in the way that you deem as, what's the better word, like deemed as sort of traditional, fit into that traditional model. Yeah.
Jane, what do you think about that?
Well, I think this go back to this the definition of leadership. That's a separate topic, and it's go back to again that if we look at what is that bamboo ceiling, right? It's in a corporate structure. Who is going to decide? Who is going to get into the management position? I think it has a lot to do with how go back to the organization setup. Do we have a leadership team that actually are open up to address that fairly? I think that's number one, because if at the top you do not open up, there's no way you can get the bottom to be equal. So I think go back to it's really the top, the leadership team has to be set up so they are open and willing to open up the company to grow into more parity and so on. So I think we have to address it from the leadership team. Now that would be the talking about what is the company culture, talking about leadership, what kind of leadership style can strive in a company. It has a lot to do with that company culture. There's sometimes unconscious bias, we just have to talk us through. But I still go back to every single company. If we see a big parity issue, it has to be addressed by system. It has to be addressed by policy, because otherwise we cannot cope. We can only correct that by good intention. We cannot correct the flow systematically. So I do think the bamboo ceiling, is something we need to be very conscious about. Second is to address this unconscious bias, and then address that through a company organizational design.
Okay. Look, I think we have probably about 3.5 minutes more. I would love to hear a key takeaway from all of you. I am curious to hear what you think a small, tangible action that everyone in the audience can take to make equality in business a reality. Do I have time?
Should we just chime in?
Yes, please. Maybe Adriana should start first.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we think about often, and we actually have been doing an audit at Girls in Tech to really understand how we define diversity, equity, and inclusion. We worked with a consulting company called EEO Consulting. And so basically, as a result of these surveys we're doing with our board and our staff and our members, we're really focusing on creating a training program, a manual, and also new policies as well as messaging. There's other organizations like Culture Amp that I always recommend to companies, larger, big brands that also do these audits. So I would say that is a great place to start. They're very reputable companies that provide really, really good results. But just in general for companies, because I know that there are a lot of companies on this call today, this is something that we've actually written a lot of blog entries about, and we have a new podcast that's launched that we are talking extensively about, and I have an actual list. So I'll pick out a few of the things that I think stand out the most. So first is diversify your boards and C-suite. This also is important for your staff. So look for opportunities for women and people of color and empower them to make change. And it's not just checking a box or hiring someone to fit that role. They must have a voice and be supported to change the system. And then it's important to institute it at all different levels, not just on the C-suite or on the management level, all different levels. Enabling women and marginalized communities is also very important, not just in the US, but around the world. For example, how are you as a company accommodating employees who are caregivers, right? Consider what flexible work hours mean, adjusting those hours, allowing people to work from home, reducing meetings, being flexible on deadlines and things like that. Digging deep into your hiring processes and practices. I think this is really important for many different reasons, but seeking out solutions that sort of level the playing field for women and people of color. We know most new hires are referrals from someone inside the company, which typically means that the white male engineer recommends a cohort, sort of leaving women and people of color less of a chance. We need to recruit from underrepresented communities and from within marginalized groups as well. Another one that I would like to include that's actually really important from my perspective and that we've actually activated at Girls in Tech is consider the education requirement for a position. I know Google, even Facebook, and some other companies are really trying to figure out, do you really need a college or university degree to actually fill this role and do it well, right? So for many of the women, marginalized groups, people of color who don't actually have a degree, can you actually hire them so that they can fill the need or the gap skills within your company? That's very important. And the last one I would say is equal pay for equal work. I mean, this is obviously very important. And I think that we're holding companies accountable in the United States. People are publishing reports like Salesforce and Twitter. I'm not sure about other places around the world, but it's becoming more of a trend as people are demanding it. So being transparent in pay and publishing reports is very important, and working towards wage parity regardless of gender or skin color. So there's many more, and we'll, I'm sure, be talking about it on the podcast. So I would just subscribe if you can, and I'll give the mic to somebody else.
Thanks, Adriana. Before we give the mic to somebody else, I have good news. We do have more than 4 minutes. My bad, totally my mistake. We have about 14 minutes more. So whatever you've talked about, Adriana, a lot of these are great segues into areas where the other speakers can speak about. Like, for example, when Jane before said it was all these ability to open up the growth happens at the leadership level. I'm keen to know from, for example, Emily, what you were a commercial leader, you manage like teams. How will you as a leader open up opportunities for people on your team? And then that, kind of feeds into what Adriana talks about making sure that we're diverse, we're fair, equal opportunity for all. Keen to hear that.
Yeah, I think this is something I very much focus on doing because, as you can tell, I don't have any hesitation to speak. I always have a point of view, and I'm very extroverted. And you find, people are working for you who are all different styles. I remember there was a VP who I brought into a very commercial role, and he was a big introvert. And I realized I need to go way out of my way to make sure I'm creating the space for him to do his job with excellence. I think it's important for us to listen with curiosity, with openness. I think we have to truly believe that there's something I can learn from everybody I meet. If we don't approach a new relationship or any relationship with that attitude, we're just closing doors before we even give opportunity for ideas to surface, for leadership to step up. I had thought about this very nice compliment that somebody paid to me once when I was leaving IHG. I don't think I'm there yet, but it has become the aspiration of who I would like to be. She said, "You've always given us opportunities to grow, but not indiscriminately." So she called me a Sandy leader, a 3D leader. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "Well, it means that when we need you in front, holding up the flag and charging, you lead from the front. When we need you standing beside us, maybe working OT late one night, you're beside us. And sometimes you stand behind us and you let us shine and get the spotlight." Again, I think I have a long way to go, but I think that kind of 3D leadership is very aspirational for me in terms of how do we really flex to the different styles of all the different thousands of people who are in our organizations who can really do more and contribute more if we give them the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. So what we have here is a view of leadership as a part of the system and the infrastructure, allowing people through to the top, and the view of what individuals as leaders can be in building for diversity. I'm really keen again to hear, like Sarah, from the work that you've done with companies, like work with like Japanese politicians. How have you seen that come to play? Are you able to guide people who are more traditional in their ways of leadership into being something closer to a Sandy leader?
I think it's a bit of a journey, right? And actually, not two people are the same. So even when we talk about like this Japanese sort of male older leaders, I think we paint that with quite a generic stroke, but no two people are the same. And we do take that approach as well. No two companies are the same. So we take a very unique approach. And, having worked, at even like a cabinet level, advising senior political leaders around gender equality, I think, I really echo Emily's point about curiosity. But something we get people to commit in doing is actually in reminding them that gender equality starts at home. So very often when you talk to them about changing processes and systems and all of that, there's a lot of resistance and pushback, around what's possible and what's not. But something like always a takeaway we get them to do is commit to doing something at home. It's actually reflect on the way you interact with your partner, how you actually bring up your sons and daughters, and how you actually bring people around your family members to help transform their point of view in some ways. And I'll always remember that I was actually sharing the panel with a Australian CEO, who's a man, and someone actually, when he was talking about what his company is doing in the D&I space, he got challenged by a journalist actually, directly go, "Okay, that's all very great what you're doing, what your company or your team's doing actually. I want to know what you as a person individually are doing to advance gender equality." And everybody was like, "Oh my God, where's this going?" And he actually said, "You know what? I make sure that I bring up my two daughters to know that there is actually no barriers in standing in front of them. And I make sure that all the decisions I make, how I interact with them every day and how I interact with the mother is demonstrative of that." And I thought that was just such a great reminder for all of us that I think we can talk about equality in businesses and all those systemic changes need to come and business leaders need to embrace it. But it won't go much further unless us as individuals start that work at home.
Fantastic. That is true. That is something that we, as business leaders, we talk about equality. We're always focused on like that one space in the office, right, in the boardroom. And yeah, right, the people we put in these seats, whether they have imposter syndromes, whether they feel like they are willing to take that chance, whether they have the opportunity, that's great to hear. Like I know this is going a little bit beyond the boardroom talk. I think Sarah brought us there right into like your personal homes and how you're role modeling to your children, to your young nieces or young people in your lives. I would love to hear how that's played out in your various roles. I think, Jane, you talked about taking a sabbatical for a year, doing mission work. How do you think that has forged the worldviews of your child?
I think it's probably the wisest decision I have made so far in my life. It was a family decision. So I was in the business, and I had a discussion with my husband. Daughter at that time was 3.5 years old, actually nearly 4, and we discussed that as a family would take 1 year off as a family, doing something, pursuing something we think is meaningful. At that time, it's more a missionary around kids, about the kids missionary, and also for sex trade kids. My daughter was very small. She didn't really understand what that means, sex trade, but she does understand dad and mom is going to spend 1 year with me doing something that I will remember when I grow up. And my daughter right now is 14 years. That was 10 years ago. And she still remembers that time. She felt like probably the most meaningful thing for her in her 14 years. I think that was tremendously impactful to my daughter in terms of her own identity and how she saw her parents making a decision together with her. And I also can share a small story. Is years ago, I had a fortune to be nominated as a Woman to Watch by Ad. So then I remember in the nomination day, I asked the organizer, I said, can I bring my daughter? My daughter was very small at the time. I think it was, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years old. And they say, well, we never had kids in the in the awards. But I say, I really want to bring my daughter to the stage, because where I am here today is because of my daughter, because I did something and she was with me and she had to sacrifice as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't get this recognition. So I took my daughter to the stage. And I still think that was very impactful, not only to me, my daughter, but also to the audience, because after that, many people come say, you know, as a woman, as a career woman, we always talk about sacrifice, and we never talk about the family sacrifice, and actually the kids sacrifice. And so I felt like, go back to your question, I think this is a journey. I really, my daughter is my partner, and she's still my partner. And I felt like we have been going through this together, and the equality scenes for her is very real, and she knows all the struggle that mom had gone through as well.
So from that note, 2 questions for you, follow up. Maybe for those with kids and those without. Number 1, what would you tell your kids in trying to, bring businesses to a state of equality when they grow up? What will you tell businesses? Adriana has given us a fantastic list of that. So feel free to share your personal point of view, what you think as individuals, as women, we can do. And then let's go around the room.
I'll start. I think I agree completely with Jane that this is a family affair, and it's not just one person leading the way. It is something that we cannot do what we do without our families. And I think, the book that I talked about, it's called The Spare Room, and it's about, over the last 2 decades, we've had 16 different children and young people staying with us who were slipping through the margins of society and just needed a safe place. That is something that I can talk about because that's what I do. But my husband did the bulk of the caretaking. In fact, he gave up his own career to take care of these kids. And my daughter gave up single child status, right? She shared her parents and her home with all these other people. Some are older sisters, some are younger brothers. And I think it's important to let them be a part of it, but also to empower them. So, this little ring right here, my daughter made it. And I wear it legitimately because it's a cool piece of jewelry, but also to let her know, you're 11, but there's nothing you can't do. This is not me patting you on the head and saying, good job, little girl. This is me saying, that is a wicked cool piece of jewelry and I want to wear it. And when we have the last kid we had in our spare room was a 13-year-old girl who was quite rough around the edges, had been raised in a brothel. She'd never had her own bedroom. She shared a room with her mom, who was a prostitute. So living with her was one of the most challenging things we've done. And I will say, and I wrote in the book, my daughter had more grace in many circumstances than I did. She had a deeper sense of understanding and compassion for this girl. And I think it's worth applauding her publicly and in the book to let her know it's not about your age. It is about your capability. And I think that kind of authentic encouragement of the things we see that are good, that we want to pay on, that we want to nurture, those are the ways that we raise the young people to become the adults that we want them to be and our future leaders.
Fabulous. Thank you. Jane, Sarah?
Well, let Sarah say.
Okay.
No,
Let's
wow.
talk about young people. Let's talk about the businesses. Like what advice would you have businesses take away? One tangible action piece.
Yeah,
I know
I
you're
think.
gonna get it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so inspired by everything, Jane, Emily, and Adriana have said. I think for business leaders is really know that you need to move beyond the rhetoric, right? It's about demonstrating and showing action and measure the impact, because your consumers, your clients, and your employees is going to hold you accountable. And this is not a fear-based approach, but just a bit of reality check, I think, at this point for everyone, that right now that is the climate, that is the level of scrutiny that you're going to be under. So be prepared and actually be committed to change. So my encouragement for business is actually not so much more of these processes, because I think, like they know, okay, if there's not a lack of those sort of studies or data or more research that needs to be done, it's actually more decisions and commitment that needs to be made. And I encourage you to move beyond the rhetoric today.
Fabulous. Jane, I'll let you wrap up on.
Yeah. Well, I think it's go back to, for us, we have the fortune to be in a position that have some impact. I still think that the best way is to demonstrate how we live out the standard we believe. And in my industry, I have to say, sometimes in my industry, in some markets, actually women are dominant because we have many women in the management position. In that regard, I think for women to demonstrate the equality is to make sure we hire men as well, right? So we have a fair hiring regardless gender. So I think the best way to demonstrate is how we live with our decision, and to make sure that people look at us, look at our decision behavior. We truly value the merit, and we truly open up, and to make sure that it's not just only women get opportunity, because if it's only women getting opportunity, we have exactly the same problem. So I think my takeaway is that being a woman leader is to make sure that we demonstrate what we believe without prejudice, regardless, which nationality and gender.
Thank you. Thank you all for that inspiring discussion. Thank you for sharing all your tangible actions and takeaways. I have a few big takeaways from the discussions that we've had. Number one, very basic, really statistically driven. It doesn't need 30 years to get us to a point of equality in the boardroom. It just requires, like all of you have said, a decision and a commitment to that. And then question the norms, because there's no such thing as normal. I think, Emily, you said that. Adriana, you talked about how we shouldn't be just thinking of like one aspect of diversity. There are so many different minorities that are left behind and left through the cracks, and we have to try to think about what this looks like, what alleged normal is, means for different people through different viewpoints. Number three, I really love this, the Sunday leadership piece. Like personally, that's a big takeaway. That's something that I think everyone here aspires to be, and I'm sure already. And the other thing that I just having these conversation near the end, like an unexpected turn, that all these problems that we see in the businesses, in the boardrooms, the solutions don't necessarily just lie there. Right, it lies outside. It lies with how we bring up children, how we role model to the young and the people of different backgrounds, and that's something that we often forget in our conversations. And as individuals, wherever we are, whatever jobs we do, we can role model that for the future. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time. It was really enlightening for me. And I appreciate the really conversations and the insights that you've shared. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.